Seth, we're just so curious because this came out of nowhere in terms of we're moving on with Ben Johnson as the head coach, Caleb Williams getting a fresh start after what had to be a frustrating rookie year in which his team lost 10 games in a row. And so much was unearthed here in these quotes that you got both before the draft and I guess the update when you talked with Carl Williams again after that rocky rookie season. Help us understand exactly what Carl's mindset was and why he wanted his son to avoid playing for the Chicago Bears and ultimately what changed their minds.
Well, look, I think that Carl is a very astute guy, and we can talk about, the unhinged quarterback dads all we want, but there's like a point to this, and that's that a lot of the success for quarterbacks depends on luck, and it depends on your employer. And he wanted his son to have the best chance of success and to go to a team that, had an established and innovative offensive mind. And, he wanted to try to figure out ways for that to happen, whether it was, he tried to find like any loophole he could. He consulted with lawyers, people like Marvin Demoff, Archie Manning, who helped do a little bit of that with Eli Manning back in the day. They considered whether to sign with the United Football League, for a year and then if that would let him be an unrestricted free agent now. But as it got closer, it was just clear that their options were limited. The only thing he could really do was return to school. He didn't want to do that. And so they went forward with the draft process. He went to the combine, he met with the Bears, and he met also with Kevin O'Connell, head coach of the Vikings, and he really vibed well with O'Connell, so much to the point where he kind of started to dream of working with him. Obviously, that was a real long shot because the Vikings are a divisional rival, and I don't think the Bears were going to trade Caleb or the pick to a divisional rival. So it kind of left it to them as like, what are you going to do? And Ryan Poles, the GM of the Bears, told Caleb, we're drafting you no matter what. And so really his only option was to try to do what Jack and John Elway did in 1983, and that's, go after a city and make the situation untenable. Carl Williams was ready to do it if that's what his son wanted. But at the end of the day, Caleb didn't want to. And as he told me, I wasn't ready to nuke Chicago. And, after he visited the Bears, he came back and said, I can do it here. I want to be a Bear.
I think, Seth, a lot of the way this is constructed, the reports from Carl to you, they take a lot of blame off of Caleb Williams. And obviously that's how we're reading it at face value. And I know that he has that reputation of wanting to do everything he possibly can for us. So we knew all about the team that Caleb had around him leading up to this draft. What was the sense you got as far as when he was telling you these things, the intent? Was it an honesty? Was it candor? Was it the fact that he's lamenting the fact that he's here? What do you think it was?
I don't know. I mean, I spent time with, Carl and Caleb before his final season at USC. Obviously Carl and Caleb, to a certain extent, were thinking a lot about the draft in the lead up to the draft. So a little bit of a ongoing conversation. And then, I just kept reporting on it. I mean, it's kind of, it's a boring answer, but it's kind of how it is.
What about the piece where you talk about Shane Waldron and Caleb Williams not knowing if he could do that, if he could work with Shane Waldron? What point did that conversation take place? We're just trying to draw a timeline because obviously Shane Waldron lost his job, as did Matt Eberflus later on in the season. Can you give us some type of timeline?
Well, so when Waldron was brought in, I think that the collective reaction from the Williams camp was a little underwhelmed. And then they met, and, and Caleb's actually spoken publicly about this, but, he was kind of wondering how they would vibe. And I think it was fine, but he really vibed with Kevin O'Connell. And Kevin O'Connell obviously played quarterback. I think he was a 4-year starter at San Diego State. He played in the NFL for a bit. He's an outstanding offensive mind. And, it really got Caleb energized. But I think as the process went on and he visited the Bears, I think he was energized by the idea of, helping being part of the process to turn that team around.
And then also same kind of question with the timeline. You describe him watching film, but had no one to guide him and tell him what to watch. At what point of the season was that? Because this is a guy who's now on his third play caller with Ben Johnson taking over as head coach. I'm just curious as to when he started to realize he wasn't getting what he thought he needed.
Yeah, it was early on and during the season. I think that, he said publicly he wanted to be coached hard. And I don't know if he quite felt that way, once the season was going. And I think that he's really eager for Ben Johnson to coach him hard and to challenge him. And that quote stands out, and it makes you shake your head at what's going on in the NFL at times. And, that happens quite a bit. I hate to say it. It's such an indictment on the league, especially the game's most important position. But Alex Smith has talked about it. And I talked about that with Caleb, where, he was the number one pick of the draft. He goes to a team and he's watching film by himself. No one taught him how to watch film. And so when he later on in his career goes to the Chiefs and they draft someone by the name of Patrick Mahomes, Alex Smith really took it upon himself to teach Patrick these things that no one taught him, how to watch film, the ways you do it from the inside out, that type of thing. And, that's the type of instruction that, the Bears didn't provide at times for Caleb Williams. And I think it's a massive indictment on, that staff.
This is ESPN senior writer Seth Wickersham. The book American Kings, a biography of the quarterback, is publishing in September. The article that we are discussing with him are excerpts from Caleb Williams' dad, Carl Williams, talking to him about his son, the draft process, and then what happened afterward. So we have the quote here that you have from Williams, Seth, saying, "I don't want my son playing for the Bears," Williams told several agents in 2024. After that reported discussion where Caleb Williams then told Carl he didn't want to nuke the city, were the words that he used. He didn't want to go against this city. What became Carl's attitude?
He was supporting his son, but he was skeptical. I mean, look at, Carl Williams on Twitter. You can Google it, but, he would tweet things that were, things that made the coaching staff look bad. So it was pretty obvious, how he thought the season was going, and, they didn't play well. I mean, everything he thought could happen, sadly, did happen. I mean, he saw it coming, and that's one of the reasons why he was so passionate about his willingness to take bullets and do what was necessary for his son to have the best chance of success.
Yeah, I think I measured that as Carl Williams being a protective dad, as he should, and wanting the best for his son. I can certainly see where he's coming from in all of this, especially given how last season actually did play out. My question is this: have you had any communication with Carl or Caleb since the Ben Johnson announcement? And if so, what has the attitude been towards Ben Johnson, just in relation to maybe how they described everything before, specifically Kevin O'Connell?
I saw Caleb, I want to say it was after the Johnson hire, and it was maybe early February, I want to say. And I did ask him if, he obviously, when he came out and he was drafted and they called his name, he wheeled around that corner and you saw him scream, just let out that huge exhale, that release. And I did ask him whether, the scream that he let out when Ben Johnson was hired was similar in terms of emotion. I think it was. I think he's pretty excited.
I think, Seth, also, you mentioned that scream, and even as I'm picturing it right now, knowing the information that has been released already as part of this book, I think there's a lot of us who wonder what it really meant, if it was truly genuine. How much did that draft visit matter when it came to all the other quotes that you have before?
Which quote?
Well, just all the quotes about not wanting to come here. And you see that
I'm just, what I was trying to take people into was just a little bit of their deliberation process, like how serious it got. It was ultimately Caleb's decision. He made the decision as a grown-up, and he, believed he could make it as a Bear. And, we'll see how it goes.
I'm really interested because the book, American Kings, A Biography of the Quarterback, this is just one facet of it. I know you had access to so many just legends, John Elway, Johnny Unitas, Warren Moon, the members of the Manning families you talked about, Steve Young, also Kirk Cousins and Drake May, currently playing in the NFL. What was your biggest takeaway through the process of writing this book on the state of the NFL and the quarterback position?
Oh, man. You might have to ask me that again in September when it comes out, when I've had a little bit more time to think about it. I mean, I think what's fascinating is just that, a high school quarterback is not a college quarterback. A college quarterback is not an NFL quarterback. An NFL quarterback is not a generational one. And yet they all have something in common. And when you sign up to do it, especially in this moment of time, when it's such a big position and the adulation and the celebrity around it is so great, I think it requires a really unique skill set. At times, you need to be the therapist for the team. At other times, you need to be the biggest jerk on the team. The ego required to go through a game, to enter, walk onto a field on game day without doubt, without feeling doubt, I think is really fascinating. And, a lot of those things have been true as long as the quarterback position's been around, and hopefully people enjoy it.
Seth, how close do you think the Williams family was to actually not being drafted by the Bears in some way, either getting out of it or having one of these plans come to fruition?
I mean, I think it was like, the gasoline's out, do we want to light the match? And Caleb didn't want to light the match.
Wow. Looking
at the experience you've had talking to these quarterbacks, and whether it was agents, whether it was members of different organizations, what Carl Williams said about the Bears being where quarterbacks go to die, he's not the first person to say that. My question is, through your research, your conversations, how dysfunctional did the Bears appear to be compared to other NFL organizations? Well,
I mean, the head coach and the offensive coordinator didn't make it through the season. So, I mean, this isn't exactly the LA Rams offensive operation. Let's just put it that way.
What were your takeaways from the definitive quote, I think, too, just from Ryan Poles, where it says in this article, Bears GM Ryan Poles stood firm telling Williams, we're drafting you no matter what. What were your takeaways from the tone, and then also anything you gleaned on the Bears side of it from that quote as well?
It reminded me a little bit of like Ernie Accorsi in 1983, where, he basically was like, my job is to pick the best player, and that's what I'm going to do. And, he picked Elway, and of course, within a week, Elway was traded for, not much of a haul compared to what the Colts could have gotten ahead of time. The Bears were all in on Caleb. I mean, they did not scout Jaden Daniels. They were all in on Caleb. And so, he was their guy. And, how, whether that was wise or not, who pans out, who doesn't, a lot of that has to do with luck and circumstance, but, the jury's out. And, Poles made some decisions. He let go of the head coach. He brought in a new one. He got a guy that I know a lot of offensive minds around the league study and steal from. And so I think that, there is that opportunity for Caleb to have the pieces in place that maybe would have been better to have a year ago.
I think it also just illustrates the apparent conflict there was and the tense nature of the situation at the time, where it implies that the Bears were aware of what was happening and they already were going into this knowing they might not have a willing participant. Is that fair?
I mean, they had leverage. They had the ultimate leverage at that point. And so, what teams say is football players play football. And, Caleb Williams is a football player. And, so I think that they, believed in their process to make an impression on him throughout the draft process, and they did. And I think that, he was sincerely excited to be a Bear and be part of that turnaround process, as I detailed in there. Obviously, the first season was a mess. And, we'll see whether Caleb turns out to be, the exception to the rule that the Bears haven't had in a very, very, very long time. Or, as Carl told me, where he says Chicago is the place quarterbacks go to die.
I mean, when you,
Every time you say it, it just elicits a reaction, like every single time.
I think the reason why, Seth, is because it's not even an original thought. So many different people have said it, from whether it's a fan, whether it's media, whether it's agents, whether it's a parent. It's been said so many times. We're hoping that trend is over here in Chicago, but there's no evidence that it is. But it seems like at the time right now that they've put a structure in place in which he can succeed, because right now he's not even the best quarterback in his draft class by performance.
Yeah, I mean, I think the good thing is everyone's fates are tied, right? You know, I mean, Caleb's fate is tied to Ben Johnson's, whose fate is tied to Ryan Poles, whose fate is tied to their success. So, you know, we'll see how it goes.
Seth, again, just thank you for your time. The book is called American Kings, a biography of the quarterback. ESPN senior writer Seth Wickersham. I know we've asked you a ton of questions about this article. What else do you want to share with us that you think is valid for the audience to know, and just what they can expect, you know, either out of the book or just more background?
Well, I mean, the book is a broad book. I mean, I hope it's the most comprehensive look at this position and this unique American job with uniquely American responsibilities, and what it's like to do it from high school to college to the NFL, and what it's like to live with it, you know, in retirement, and, you know, how it came to be, why this position, you know, ended up taking over, you know, shortstops on college campuses and center field for the Yankees in pro sports. And I think there's just a lot of cool stuff in there. And, you know, Caleb's a character in it, and his story matters, but there's a lot of stories in there that I hope people enjoy.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. We look forward to more articles coming out in connection to this. Something tells me this won't be the only one. Is that fair to say, at least?
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, hopefully it won't be.
Okay, so more articles that'll come out previewing this book, American Kings, a biography of the quarterback. ESPN senior writer Seth Wickersham, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this massive piece of news with us on The Score.
Thanks, Seth.
Thank you.